The morning started like any other for Roberto Castillo. He was 42 years old, a single dad living in the heart of San Antonio, Texas, raising his 10-year-old daughter, Sophia, on his own. Every morning, he woke up before 6, made her breakfast, checked her inhaler was in her backpack, and drove her to school before heading to work. He had been doing this routine for 7 years, ever since his wife walked out and left him holding Sophia's tiny hand at the door. Roberto worked at Pinnacle Technologies, a company that had grown from a small startup into a $200 million business. He was not an engineer or a programmer. He was a marketing specialist, but not just anyone. He was the kind of man who listened carefully, remembered details, and built real relationships with clients. His team respected him. His clients trusted him. And he gave everything he had to that job, sometimes working 60 hours a week, sometimes missing Sophia's soccer games because a deadline could not wait. He told himself it was worth it. He told himself he was building something stable for his daughter. He told himself the company valued what he brought to the table. 7 years of dedication. 7 years of early mornings and late nights. 7 years of choosing work over the moments he could never get back. Roberto believed that loyalty meant something. He believed hard work was always noticed. He had no idea how wrong he was. And he had no idea that everything was about to change in 3 cold sentences sitting in his inbox. The email arrived at 9:17 on a Friday morning. Roberto was sitting at his desk with his coffee still warm, about to review a presentation for the Meridian project. He saw a message from the HR department and opened it without much thought. Then he read it. 3 sentences. That was all it took to destroy 7 years. Your position has been terminated. Effective immediately. Please clear your desk by noon. Security will escort you out. He read it again, then a 3rd time. His hands were steady, but his chest felt like something had collapsed inside it. He minimized the email and looked at his computer screen. His desktop background was a photo of Sophia, her gap-toothed smile wide and bright, taken on the first day of 4th grade. That smile, which usually gave him strength during stressful moments, now filled him with a kind of fear he had not felt since the day his wife left. How would he pay the mortgage? How would he cover Sophia's asthma medication? How would he explain to a 10-year-old girl that their life was about to get much harder? Around him, the marketing department moved like nothing had happened. Co-workers typed, laughed, talked about weekend plans. Nobody knew. Nobody could see that the ground had just disappeared under Roberto's feet. He opened his desk drawer slowly and pulled out a small stress ball Sophia had given him for his birthday. For when work gets crazy, Daddy, she had said. He squeezed it hard and tried to breathe. If you have ever been let go from a job you gave everything to, you know the feeling Roberto was carrying at that moment. It is not just about money, though the money is terrifying enough. It is about what the rejection says about you, about your worth, about whether any of the sacrifice was ever real. Roberto had skipped birthday dinners. He had stayed late on Christmas Eve to finish reports. He had answered emails at midnight, while Sophia slept just down the hall. And now, in 3 sentences, it was over. He opened his drawer again and started the painful process of packing. A coffee mug Sophia had painted for him in art class. A small cactus that had survived 3 years under the office lights. A framed photo of Sophia on her first day of kindergarten, her backpack almost bigger than she was. Awards for marketing campaigns that had helped build Pinnacle's reputation from the ground up. Each item felt heavier than it should have. Stories like Roberto's happen every day to good people who trusted the wrong system. And that is exactly why this channel exists. If this story already has your attention, if you believe that loyalty should mean something and that real people deserve real respect, then this is your place. Welcome to Addictive Stories, where we share the kind of stories that remind you how fast life can shift and how strength shows up when you least expect it. Subscribe now so you never miss a story that matters. Now, let's get back to Roberto and what happened next. 20 floors above Roberto's desk, Victoria Harmon sat in her corner office, reviewing numbers that made her stomach turn. At 43 years old, she had built Pinnacle Technologies from a garage startup into a major player in the tech industry. The office around her, glass walls, a panoramic view of San Antonio's skyline, a sleek desk that cost more than most people's cars, was a daily reminder of how far she had come. But the numbers on her screen told a different story. The company was bleeding. The market had turned. Competition had hit harder than expected. And if they did not close a Meridian deal, a $50 million contract that would keep Pinnacle running to the downer, and things would get very bad very fast. Victoria had already authorized a painful round of cuts. 32 employees were being let go that morning. She told herself it was necessary. She told herself it was business. Standing by her desk was Howard Reeves, her CFO, a careful man who always had clean hands when the dirty work was done. The cuts have been implemented as directed, he said. 32 employees terminated this morning, including all the redundancies in marketing we identified. Victoria nodded without looking up from the projections. And the Meridian contract? Still pending, Howard replied. Their board meets Monday to make the final decision. Victoria finally set down her pen. Get me their technical questions, she said. I'll review them myself this weekend. Neither of them knew yet that the man they had just thrown away was the only person standing between Pinnacle and disaster. Down in the marketing department, a woman named Priya Sharma was walking past Roberto's cubicle when she stopped cold. She saw the cardboard box. She saw the photos coming down from the walls. She stepped closer, and her face changed. Roberto, what are you doing? She asked. He looked up, his voice flat and tired. Didn't you get the memo? I've been let go. Priya stared at him. What? That's impossible. There has to be some mistake. Roberto handed her his phone with the email on the screen. She read it, and her expression fell. This makes no sense, she said. You're our lead on the Meridian project. You designed the entire integration strategy. Roberto shrugged, trying to hold himself together in front of his colleagues. Apparently, I'm redundant. Priya shook her head hard. Wait here. I'm going to talk to HR right now. Roberto watched her walk away, and he knew the truth before she even came back. Corporate decisions like this were not reversed. He had seen it happen to others over his 7 years at Pinnacle. Good people who disappeared overnight. Their desks empty on Monday. Their names becoming awkward gaps in conversation, like words everyone agreed not to say. A security guard appeared at the entrance to the marketing department. He was there for Roberto. That final indignity, being walked out like a man who had done something wrong, when all he had ever done was show up and give his best. Roberto picked up his box and walked toward the door with his head as high as he could keep it. Victoria's executive meeting was interrupted by a call she had not expected. Her assistant's voice came through the intercom, tight and careful. Miss Harmon, I have James Chun, CTO from Meridian, on line 1. He says it's regarding their final technical review. Victoria excused herself from the room and took the call alone. James, good to hear from you, she said smoothly. I was just reviewing the integration timeline. James Chin did not match her tone. Victoria, he said, we've completed our technical assessment and we have serious concerns. Major ones. Victoria's stomach pulled tight. What kind of concerns? Your team's responses to our integration questions were not adequate. We need detailed answers about how your system will interface with our proprietary database architecture. The documentation we received is missing critical components. Victoria kept her voice steady. I'm sure we can address any gaps. Why don't I have our technical lead reach out to you directly today? James paused, then said what she was dreading. Victoria, I'll be blunt. Our board meets Monday. Without satisfactory answers by Sunday night, I cannot recommend moving forward with Pinnacle. And I want you to understand, I am the strongest voice you have at Meridian. If I cannot stand behind this, the contract is gone. After the call, Victoria moved fast. She called her CTO, Michael Barnes, into her office immediately. Who is handling the technical documentation for Meridian? She asked. Michael shifted his weight. That would be Roberto Castillo, in marketing. He's been a liaison between our development team and Meridian's technical staff. He understands both sides. Get him up here now. Michael hesitated. That might be difficult. I believe he was on the reduction list this morning. Victoria stared at Michael Barnes without blinking. What? She said, and her voice had gone very quiet, which everyone who worked with her knew was more dangerous than shouting. The marketing department had to cut 4 positions. Michael said carefully, I believe Roberto was one of them. Who made that decision? Howard signed off on the final list. Victoria grabbed her phone and called HR directly. Is Roberto Castillo still in the building? Let me check, the HR director said. There was a pause that lasted too long. Security is escorting him out right now. Stopped him immediately in the lobby downstairs. Roberto was standing at the security desk with his cardboard box balanced in his arms. His employee badge had already been deactivated and placed flat on the counter. He was watching the security guard process his exit paperwork, mentally calculating how long his savings would stretch. He had about 3 months of expenses saved. Sophia's medication cost over $200 a month. The mortgage was $1,400. After that, there was food, electricity, the internet she needed for school, and the dance classes that were the one thing that made her feel like a normal kid. He was deep in those numbers when he heard his name called from across the lobby. He turned, and his breath stopped for a moment. Walking toward him across the marble floor was Victoria Harmon herself, the woman who ran the company, the woman he had seen maybe 5 times in 7 years, always from a distance. She was walking fast, and her expression was unreadable. "Mr. Castillo," she said, "there has been a mistake." Roberto shifted his cardboard box and looked at the CEO of Pinnacle Technologies standing in front of him in the lobby. "Miss Harmon," he said, "there has been a mistake." She repeated, getting straight to the point. "Your termination was an error. We need you to come back upstairs immediately." She turned to the security guard. "Please reactivate Mr. Castillo's credentials right away." Roberto did not move. He stood there looking at this woman who had, just over an hour ago, allowed his life to be dismantled by 3 sentences in an email, and now she was asking him to come back upstairs as if none of it had happened. "May I ask what changed in the last hour?" he said carefully. Victoria's jaw tightened slightly. She was clearly not a woman who explained herself often. "I've just learned you're essential to the Meridian project," she said. "Your termination was not properly reviewed." Roberto set his cardboard box down on the security desk. The photos of Sophia, the painted coffee mug, the little cactus. He set all of it down, and he looked at Victoria Harmon directly. "With all due respect, Miss Harmon," he said, "I don't think I can just pretend this morning didn't happen. I was fired by email after 7 years of service." He said it calmly, not with anger, but with the kind of clarity that only comes from someone who has already faced the worst possibility and found that he could survive it. Victoria glanced around the lobby, aware that people were watching. "Let's discuss this privately," she said. "Please." And for the first time in a long time, the CEO of Pinnacle Technologies used the word please like she meant it. Upstairs in her office, with the San Antonio skyline behind her and the silence of a closed door between them and the rest of the company, Victoria Harmon did something she was not practiced at. She told the truth. The Meridian contract was in serious danger. Without Roberto's deep knowledge of both the technical integration and the specific concerns Meridian had raised, Pinnacle would lose the deal. And without the deal, the 32 people let go that morning would be just the beginning. Hundreds of jobs were at risk. "So, I'm suddenly valuable because you realize you need me," Roberto said. His voice was flat, but not mean, just honest. "Yes," Victoria said. "I won't insult you by pretending otherwise." Roberto looked past her toward the window. He thought about Sophia sitting in her classroom right now, working on a math worksheet, drawing pictures in the margins, completely unaware that her father's world had nearly collapsed and been rebuilt within the same morning. "I have a daughter," he said. "She's 10. Her mother left when Sophia was 3. It's been just the 2 of us ever since. Every decision I make, she feels the effect of it." Victoria waited without interrupting. "This morning, I had to think about telling her we might need to move to a smaller apartment, change schools, give up dance classes. I had to think about what would happen if she had an asthma attack, and I couldn't afford her medication." His voice stayed steady, but the weight behind the words was heavy enough to fill the whole room. "I can't put her through that kind of uncertainty again," he said. And then he told Victoria exactly what he needed. Roberto Castillo was not a man who had ever been in a negotiation like this one. He was not a businessman who played power games. He was a single father who had just spent 2 hours thinking his daughter's life was about to get harder, and that experience had clarified something important inside him. He knew his value now in a way he had not known it before that morning. So he spoke plainly. "I'll help with the Meridian project," he said, "but I need guarantees. A 2-year contract minimum. And I want to lead the integration team going forward, with compensation that reflects what this work is actually worth." Victoria studied him. She had been building her company for 12 years, and she knew exactly when she was cornered. More importantly, she was honest enough with herself to admit it. "Done," she said. "I'll have legal draw up the paperwork today." And so, less than 3 hours after being escorted toward the exit, like he was no longer welcome, Roberto Castillo sat back down at his desk with a contract being written and a company depending on him. Over the next 48 hours, he worked almost without stopping. He knew the Meridian integration challenges in a way nobody else at Pinnacle did, because he had been listening carefully for months, not just in official meetings, but in the small conversations that happen on the side, the ones where people share what they are actually worried about. He had built real relationships with Meridian's technical team, and now those relationships were the only thing standing between Pinnacle and failure. Roberto barely slept that weekend. He sat in the conference room at Pinnacle Technologies with stacks of documentation around him, his laptop open, his phone nearby in case Sophia needed him. He had called his neighbor, Mrs. Delgado, a kind 68-year-old woman who had watched Sophia before, and asked if she could stay with his daughter through the weekend. Mrs. Delgado had said yes without hesitating, and Sophia had sounded happy enough on the phone, excited about watching movies and helping make tamales. So Roberto worked. He mapped out every concern Meridian's technical team had raised. He went through every email exchange, every meeting note, every informal conversation he had recorded in his own careful shorthand. He remembered a meeting he had attended the previous month with Meridian's database administrators. It had not been an official technical review. It had been a casual tour of their systems, the kind of meeting where people show you what they're proud of, and their database administrators had talked at length about a custom indexing system they had built themselves. Nobody from Pinnacle's development team had flagged it as a potential issue, but Roberto had written down. He had gone home that night and researched how that kind of custom architecture could interact with Pinnacle's system. He had found 2 potential conflict points and quietly begun preparing solutions, not because anyone asked him to, just because he listened, and listening was the most important thing he knew how to do. By Sunday evening, he had a document that answered every question Meridian had raised and several they had not asked yet. Victoria reviewed the documentation herself before it was sent to Meridian. She sat at her desk on Sunday night, reading through what Roberto had prepared, and the longer she read, the more something shifted in her. This was not standard technical writing. It was not the kind of corporate documentation her team usually produced, full of careful language that said a great deal while committing to very little. This was clear. It was specific. It addressed concerns that Meridian had not even formally raised yet, which meant Roberto had anticipated them, which meant he had understood their needs on a level that went far beyond his job description. She called him into her office briefly. "How did you know they would ask about these specific database architecture concerns?" She asked. "Our development team didn't flag these as issues at all." Roberto leaned against the doorframe, tired but steady. "I listened," he said simply. "When I met with their database team last month, they told me about their custom indexing system. It wasn't part of the official agenda. They just mentioned it because they were proud of it. But I knew it would create an integration challenge, so I spent some time on my own figuring out the solution." Victoria nodded slowly. She was seeing Roberto Castillo in a completely different light now. This was not just technical knowledge. This was something harder to teach and harder to find. It was emotional intelligence, relationship building, and foresight all working together. It was the ability to hear what people were not quite saying and to care enough to prepare for it. She thought about how close she had come to throwing all of that away forever. The thought was uncomfortable in a way she did not push aside. Monday morning came with the weight of everything that had been building since Friday. Roberto arrived at the office before most of the staff, still running on very little sleep, his mind moving through contingency plans even as he poured himself his first coffee. He sat in the conference room where he had spent the weekend and waited. There was nothing more he could do. The documentation had been sent. The questions had been answered. Now it was in Meridian's hands. Victoria was on the executive floor, doing the same kind of waiting that powerful people do, where they pretend to be busy with other things, so the anxiety has somewhere to go. Her assistant kept refreshing messages. The board meeting at Meridian had started at 8 in the morning. Nobody knew how long it would take. Nobody knew which way it would go. What they knew was that $50 million in the future of the company were sitting in a boardroom across town, being decided by people who had read Roberto's documentation over the weekend. The call came at 11:14. Victoria picked it up before the second ring. It was James Chun. His voice, unlike their last conversation, was warm. The board meeting just concluded. He said, "Victoria, the contract is yours. Your documentation addressed every concern we had, and frankly, it impressed our technical team in ways we did not expect. Whatever you are paying that integration specialist of yours, I can tell you it is not enough." Victoria let out a breath she felt like she had been holding since Friday morning. "Thank you, James," she said. "You have no idea what this means." She hung up and stood at her window for a long moment before going to find Roberto. Victoria walked down to the conference room where Roberto was gathering his materials. He looked like a man who had given everything he had and was running on the last of his reserve. She stood in the doorway, and he looked up. "Meridian approved the contract," she said. $50 million over 3 years. You just saved this company." Roberto nodded slowly. He was too tired for celebration and too honest to pretend otherwise. "I'm glad," he said. "I believe in what we do here. That has always been true." Victoria stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. What she said next did not come easily. She was not built for apologies. 12 years of running a company had taught her to move forward, not backward, to fix problems rather than linger on them. But she stood there, and she said anyway, "I owe you an apology, not just for what happened Friday, for not recognizing your value sooner. 7 years, Roberto. You deserve better than what happened Friday morning." Roberto accepted it without drama. "Thank you," he said. Victoria nodded and shifted into what she did best. "The contract I promised you is ready," she said. 2 years leading the integration team with a raise that reflects what this weekend demonstrated. But I want to offer you something different, something more. Roberto raised an eyebrow. She took a breath and told him about the idea that had been forming in her mind since Sunday night, when she had sat reading his documentation, and understood, for the first time, what kind of person she had almost lost. Victoria Harmon looked at Roberto Castillo across the conference room table and said something she had never said to anyone in 12 years of running Pinnacle Technologies. "I want to create a new position for you," she said. "Chief Integration Officer, not just overseeing the Meridian project, but all major client integrations across the company. You would report directly to me. 3-year contract, executive compensation, and the flexibility to handle what you need to handle for your daughter." Roberto was quiet for a moment. Then he asked the question that was most honest. "Why?" Not suspicion, just genuine curiosity. "Because this weekend showed me something I should have understood a long time ago." Victoria said, "We have been so focused on technology and growth that we stopped paying attention to the human connections that make technology worth anything. You understand both sides of that. You understand the technical challenges, and you understand the people going through them. We need that kind of thinking at the executive level, not buried in a cubicle on the 20th floor." Roberto thought about Sophia. He thought about the stress ball in his pocket. He thought about the photo of her on the first day of kindergarten and the one on his desktop of her gap-toothed smile. He thought about 7 years of 60-hour weeks and the soccer games he had missed and the way he had told himself it was all worth it. Maybe now it actually was. He looked at Victoria and said yes, not with excitement, though the offer was extraordinary. He said it with the quiet steadiness of a man who had been tested that morning and found that he was still standing. "Yes," he said, "I'll take the position." The paperwork was signed by Tuesday afternoon. Roberto Castillo, 42 years old, single father, 7-year veteran of a company that had nearly thrown him away on a Friday morning, was now Chief Integration Officer at Pinnacle Technologies. He had a new office on the executive floor. He had a salary that meant Sophia's medication was never in question again. He had a title that finally matched what he'd been doing quietly for years without recognition. He called Sophia from the parking lot before driving to pick her up from school. He told her that Daddy had a new job, a really important one, and that things were going to be okay. She asked if she still had to change schools. He told her no. She asked if she could keep her dance classes. He told her yes, absolutely yes. There was a pause, and then she said, "I made tamales with Mrs. Delgado this weekend, Daddy. We made a lot." He laughed for the first time since Thursday night, and it felt like something releasing in his chest. But Roberto did not forget what Friday morning had felt like. He did not forget the email. He did not forget standing in the lobby with his box and his daughter's photo, and the quiet terror of watching his ability to care for her slip through his fingers. He kept those feelings carefully, not to be bitter, but to remember. He had been that person. He knew what it felt like, and now that he had a voice in how the company worked, he intended to use it. Roberto's first month as Chief Integration Officer was a steep climb. He was managing not just the Meridian project, but 2 other major client integrations that had been handled poorly for years. He was sitting in executive meetings where decisions were made quickly and human consequences were considered slowly, if at all. He was learning a new level of the company from the inside, seeing how choices that looked clean on a spreadsheet could completely derail someone's life by Friday morning. He brought it up in his first full executive team meeting. He was careful about how he said it because he understood these were smart people who were not careless, just focused on the wrong things. What if we build a review step into major decisions? He asked, not just financial impact, but human impact. Before we cut a position or restructure a team, someone asked the question, what does this do to the people involved? How does it affect their ability to do the rest of their work? Their families? The room was quiet. Some faces were skeptical. Howard Reeves, the CFO who had signed off on the termination list, looked particularly uncertain. But Victoria, sitting at the head of the table, was nodding. She had already been thinking about this. She had been thinking about it since Sunday night, when she read Roberto's documentation and realized that the most valuable thing in her company was also the thing most invisible to her balance sheet. She supported the proposal in that meeting. And within 3 weeks, Pinnacle had a human impact review process built into every major personnel decision. The 32 people who had been terminated on that Friday morning were not all gone. Some had already accepted severance and moved on, but 12 of them were still in the process, still in the 2-week transition period the company offered. Roberto and Victoria reviewed each of their cases personally. Of those 12, 9 were offered reassignments to other departments where their skills were actually needed. Not charity, not pity, real positions where they would contribute and grow. Roberto knew 2 of those 9 personally. One was a woman named Carmen Flores, 38 years old, who had been in the data entry department for 4 years and was cut because her role was being automated. But Roberto had worked with Carmen on a project the previous year, and he knew she had an unusual ability to spot inconsistencies in large datasets that even the automated systems missed. He recommended her for a quality review role in the new integration team. She accepted. Within a month, she had caught 3 significant data errors that would have caused expensive problems with clients. The other was a man named Daniel Torres, 51 years old, who had been in client services for 6 years. He knew Pinnacle's older clients better than anyone. Roberto placed him in a client relations role focused specifically on long-term accounts. Daniel knew exactly how to talk to people who had been with the company for years and felt nervous about new systems and changes. He was exactly what those clients needed and exactly what Pinnacle had almost thrown away. The Human Impact Review, it turned out, was not just kind. It was good business. Victoria Harmon was not a woman who changed easily. She had built her company by being decisive, efficient, and focused on outcomes. Feelings had not been part of the formula. She had told herself that the best thing she could do for her employees was keep the company alive, and that sometimes keeping the company alive meant making hard choices fast. She believed that. She still believed part of it. But something had shifted since Friday morning. She could not unsee what she had seen in Roberto's face in the lobby when he set his cardboard box down on the security desk. She could not unhear the way he had talked about Sophia, about the medication, about the fear of watching your ability to care for your child slip away because of 3 sentences in an email. She had made a decision that morning without knowing she was making it. She had signed off on a list of names without thinking of them as people with daughters and dogs and mortgages and medicines. She started doing something she had never done before. She walked the floors, not to inspect or to manage, but to learn. She stopped at desks and asked people questions, real ones, not the polite questions executives asked when they wanted to seem approachable. She asked about projects, yes, but she also asked about challenges, about what felt broken, about what people needed that they were not getting. Some of her executive team thought she was going through a phase, Howard Reeves especially, but the numbers told a different story. Employee retention had already improved in the first 6 weeks after the changes began. 2 months after mourning that had almost ended everything, Roberto sat in his new office on the executive floor of Pinnacle Technologies. The room was not large by executive standards, but it had a window and a real door and a desk where he could spread out his work without worrying about the person in the next cubicle overhearing a sensitive call. On the desk sat the same photo of Sophia that had lived on his old desk, the one from her first day of kindergarten. Next to it was a new one, taken just the previous weekend. In the new photo, Sophia was standing in her dance costume, a bright yellow dress she'd been talking about for 3 months, her arms raised at the end of her recital. Roberto was next to her, his arm around her shoulders, grinning like a man who could not believe his luck. He had been there, not answering emails from the parking lot, not checking his phone from the back row, hoping nobody noticed. He had been sitting in the front with Mrs. Delgado, who had cried a little at the performance, and he had watched every single moment of it. That photo meant more to him than the title on his door. It meant that the math had changed, not just the financial math, though that had changed dramatically. The daily math of his life, the calculation of what he had to give up to keep everything running, had shifted in a way that made the rest feel possible. He was still working hard. He was still committed, but he was not vanishing anymore. He was present, and Sophia could feel the difference, even if she could not name it. Roberto's phone buzzed on a Tuesday morning with a text from Victoria. "Executive meeting in 10 minutes, she wrote, bringing Sophia's cookies for the team. He smiled at the screen. 3 months ago, Victoria Harmon had not known his daughter's name. Now Sophia's oatmeal cookies, which Roberto brought on the days she baked with Mrs. Delgado, had become a small tradition in executive meetings. Sophia did not know she was baking for a CEO. She just knew that Daddy's co-workers like her cookies, and that made her feel proud. Small things like that were different now. The executive team had started to know each other as people, not just as functions in an organizational chart. They knew that Michael Barnes, the CTO, coached Little League on weekends. They knew that Howard Reeves, the CFO who had signed the termination list, had a son with a learning disability and spent 2 evenings a week volunteering at a tutoring center. They knew that Victoria herself had a mother in a care facility in Austin who she visited every 3rd Sunday. These things had not been secret before. They had simply been invisible. The Human Impact Review had cracked something open in the culture, and what came through the crack was not weakness. It was connection. Roberto had not expected to change a company. He had only asked for what he deserved and done his job at the highest level he knew how. But leadership, real leadership, he was learning, was rarely about grand gestures. It was about the small decisions made consistently, the choice to see people clearly, day after day, even when it was easier not to. The Meridian project launched on schedule. Roberto led the integration team through every phase, and what had seemed like an impossibly complicated technical challenge turned out to be manageable when you had the right people talking to each other. That was always the real issue, not the technology itself, but the communication between the people on both sides who understood it. Roberto was a bridge. He always had been. Now he had the authority to build that bridge properly. James Chen called him personally after the first phase was complete. "Your team made this feel easy," James said. "I've been through 4 major integrations in the last 5 years, and this is the first one where I did not lose a single night of sleep." Roberto thanked him and meant it. He passed the praise directly to the team in his next meeting, naming each person specifically, saying out loud what they had done and why it mattered. He had learned In 30 years of working and watching, that recognition given privately was kind, but recognition given publicly was transforming. He also learned from Meridian's team. He made a point of visiting their offices twice during the integration, not because the project required it, but because relationships required it. He sat in their break room and had coffee with their database administrators. He asked about the custom indexing system they were so proud of. He learned more about it, and in learning more, he found 2 additional improvements that made the integration cleaner and faster than the original plan. Listening was still, as it had always been, the most powerful tool he owned. Carmen Flores came to Roberto's office 3 months into her new quality review role. She knocked on the open door, and he waved her in. She sat across from him and put a short report on his desk. "I found something," she said. He read through it. She had identified a pattern in the data errors she had been catching, a pattern that pointed to a flaw not in the current integration, but in a legacy system that had been running for 4 years. If the flaw was not addressed, it would create significant problems when Pinnacle expanded the Meridian integration in Phase 2. Roberto looked up at her. "How long did it take you to find this?" She shrugged. "I noticed the first sign about 3 weeks ago. I spent the evening since then tracing it back." She said it like it was nothing. Like spending her evenings tracking down a data flaw in a system she had only been working with for 3 months was just a normal thing a person did. Roberto set the report down carefully. "Carmen," he said, "this is exactly the kind of thing that prevents a $1 million mistake. Have you told anyone else about this?" "No," she said. "I wanted to tell you first." He nodded. "We're going to fix this," he said. "And I'm going to make sure everyone knows you found it." He watched her expression change, just slightly. The way a person looks when they've been seen after a long time of being invisible. He knew that look well. Daniel Torres turned 62 the month after his reassignment. Roberto found out through Carmen, who had worked with Daniel for years. On the morning of Daniel's birthday, Roberto stopped by his desk before the workday started, before most of the office had arrived. He had a coffee from the Good Place 2 blocks away and a card that everyone on the integration team had signed. Daniel looked at the card for a long moment, running his thumb along the signatures. He had not expected this. "You saved my job," he said quietly, "not just a paycheck. This is where I belong. I know these clients. I know what they need." Roberto nodded. "I know you do. That's why you're here." Daniel nodded and turned back to his screen, blinking more than usual. Some moments do not need more words. Roberto thought about that exchange for the rest of the day. He thought about how easy it would have been for Daniel Torres to have simply disappeared. Another name gone from the company roster. Another gap in the conversation. Another person whose years of knowledge walked out the door forever because no one had taken the time to ask the right question. He thought about how many companies were doing exactly that every day, cutting people loose not because those people were not valuable, but because no one had taken the time to understand what they were actually worth. The loss was invisible on the balance sheet. It showed up later, in failed integrations and lost contracts and clients who felt like nobody really knew them anymore. 6 months after the Friday morning that changed everything, Roberto stood in front of Pinnacle's full staff at the company's quarterly meeting. Victoria had asked him to speak about the human impact review process, what it was, how it worked, and what it had produced in its first months. He had prepared notes, but he did not use them. He just talked. He told them the truth. He told them about the email. He told them about the cardboard box and Sophia's painted coffee mug and the stress ball she had given him. He told them about standing in the lobby calculating how long his savings would last and whether he could afford Sophia's medication. He told them what it felt like to have 7 years reduced to 3 sentences and a security escort. He did not tell it with anger. He told it clearly, the way you tell a story that still lives close to you, that has not faded into abstraction yet. The room was very quiet. Then he told them about what had happened since. About Carmen Flores finding the data flaw. About Daniel Torres knowing his clients in ways no database could replicate. About the integration team working with Meridian in a way that made a $50 million deal feel like a partnership instead of a transaction. He told them that none of it would have happened if one person at the right moment had asked the right question. What does this person actually do? And what do we lose when they are gone? The room stayed quiet for a moment after he finished. Then it wasn't Victoria followed Roberto at the staff meeting. She had been planning to give the usual quarterly update, projections, and growth targets, and the pipeline of new business. She still gave those things. But she added something she had not planned to say. She talked about the Friday morning in October, when she had authorized 32 terminations without personally reviewing a single file. She did not use careful corporate language. She said it plainly. I made decisions about people's lives without treating them as people. That was wrong. And it almost cost this company everything. Howard Reeves was sitting in the third row. He did not look comfortable, but he also did not look away. After the meeting, he found Roberto in the hallway. I owe you something, he said. An acknowledgement at least. I signed that list. I should have looked harder at what each person was actually doing before I signed. Roberto looked at him. I appreciate you saying that. Howard, genuinely. They shook hands. It was not the beginning of a close friendship, but it was the beginning of something real, the kind of professional respect that comes when two people have been honest with each other, even when it would have been easier not to be. Roberto walked back to his office and sat for a minute before his next meeting. He thought about what it had taken to get here, not just a weekend of work, not just a negotiation in the lobby, but the 7 years before all of that, the 60-hour weeks, the missed soccer games, the patience of believing that doing good work in good faith would eventually be recognized. It had taken a crisis to make it visible. He wished it had not required that, but he was grateful for where it had led. Sophia turned 11 3 months after her father became chief integration officer. Roberto took the day off. He had never taken Sophia's birthday off before. There had always been something urgent, some meeting, some deadline that seemed to make taking a personal day impossible. But now he understood something he had not understood before, that the urgency had always been manageable. He had just never tested it, because he had never believed he was allowed to. He took her to the botanical garden in the morning, because she had been asking to go since she was 8. They walked to a butterfly house, and she made him stand very still, while a blue morpho landed on his shoulder. She took a photo with his phone, and made it his new screen wallpaper, without asking. He did not change it. They had lunch at a Mexican restaurant on the Riverwalk, the kind of place where the chips came in a basket the size of a mixing bowl. Sophia ordered the quesadillas and ate Moses' rice as well. In the afternoon, they went to a bookstore and he told her she could pick 3 books, any 3 she wanted. She took 45 minutes and selected very carefully. On the drive home, she was quiet in the passenger seat in the way she got when she was thinking something through. Then she said, "Daddy, are you happy at work now?" He glanced at her. "Yeah, Mija, I think I am." She nodded like this confirmed something she had already suspected. "Good," she said. "You seem less tired." He reached over and squeezed her hand. She let him hold it the rest of the way home. The story of Roberto Castillo spread beyond Pinnacle Technologies, not through press releases or marketing campaigns, but the way real stories spread, person to person, in the kind of conversation that happens when something has genuinely moved you. One of the executives from Meridian mentioned it to a colleague at a conference. The colleague worked for a consulting firm that advised mid-sized tech companies. She found the story interesting enough to write about in her firm's newsletter. The newsletter reached 300 executives across the country. Several of them reached out to Pinnacle, not to offer contracts, though 2 eventually did, but to ask about the human impact review process. How did it work? What did it cost to implement? What had the results looked like in measurable terms? Roberto spent several hours a week for the following 2 months answering those questions for companies he had never heard of in cities he had never visited, describing a process he had essentially invented out of necessity and common sense. Victoria suggested formalizing it. They could document the process, turn it into a framework, and offer it through a consulting arm of Pinnacle. Roberto thought about it for a week and then said he would support on one condition. The framework had to be free for small businesses and nonprofits. For companies with fewer than 50 employees, the documentation would be open and available at no cost. Victoria agreed without argument. She had agreed to more surprising things than that since October. The framework launched 4 months later and was downloaded over 2,000 times in its first 3 weeks. On the 1-year anniversary of the Friday morning in October, Roberto did something that surprised his assistant. He asked her to block the entire morning on his calendar and mark it as personal time. She did it without asking why. He arrived at the office anyway, but instead of going to his own floor, he went to the marketing department on the 20th floor. He walked the same path he had walked a year ago with his cardboard box. He stopped at the cubicle where he had worked for 7 years. Someone new was there now, a young man named Marco, 24 years old, who had joined the company 6 months ago. Roberto introduced himself and asked Marco how he was settling in. Marco was visibly nervous talking to an executive he had only seen in meetings. Roberto pulled up a chair and sat at his level, and they talked for half an hour. He did the same with 4 other people on the floor that morning. Not performance reviews, not check-ins, just conversations. He asked what was working and what was not. He asked what people needed that they were not getting. He asked if anyone felt like they were doing work that nobody noticed. One woman, 47 years old, named Esperanza, said she'd been quietly managing a client relationship for 2 years that had never appeared in any formal record. Nobody knew she was doing it. Roberto spent the next week making sure it was documented, recognized, and compensated. Then he went back the following month to do it again. He made it a practice, a monthly walk, because the most important things in a company were always the things that were hardest to see from the top. Roberto kept the termination email. He had it printed and framed, a single sheet of paper under glass, sitting on the credenza behind his desk where he could see it every time he sat down. His assistant had asked him about it once. Carefully, not sure if it was something painful, he kept to remind himself not to get comfortable. He had shaken his head. "No," he said, "I keep it because it's true. It happened. It was real. And real things deserve to be remembered." He did not keep it out of bitterness. He had felt bitter in the lobby that morning, with his box and his badge on the counter and security guard filling out forms. But bitterness was a weight he could not afford to carry while raising Sophia. He had let it move through him, and then he had set it down. What he kept instead was the clarity that morning had given him. He knew now with absolute certainty what he was worth, not because Victoria had told him, not because of the title on his door or the salary in his account, but because he had stood in a lobby and negotiated for his own value in the same breath. He was trying to keep from shaking, and he had done it with dignity. That was what the email reminded him, not the rejection. The response, the way he had set his box down and looked at Victoria Harmon and said, plainly, "I cannot pretend this morning did not happen." That was who he was. And knowing who you are, clearly and without apology, was worth more than any contract. A year and a half after that Friday morning in October, Roberto sat in his office on a Thursday afternoon watching Sophia's dance recital video on his phone. She had performed 3 weeks ago, and he had been there, front row, no emails, no phone calls, just him and Mrs. Delgado, and a small bouquet of yellow flowers that matched Sophia's costume. He watched the video again not because he had missed anything, but because it still made him feel something he wanted to keep feeling. His door was open. Victoria walked past, slowed, saw what he was watching, and smiled in the doorway. "She doesn't know she saved this company, too," Victoria said. Roberto looked up. "In a way she did," he said. "If I hadn't needed to get home to her, and thought about what she would lose, I might not have had the courage to set the box down and negotiate." Victoria nodded. "Some of our best decisions come from the people we're trying to protect." She moved on down the hall, and Roberto watched his daughter spin on the small screen of his phone. What happened at Pinnacle Technologies was not a fairy tale. Nobody became perfect. Howard still moved fast and sometimes forgot to look. Michael still undervalued things that did not show up in code. Victoria still had days where growth felt more real to her than people. But the difference now was that someone was in the room whose job it was to ask the human question. And that question, asked consistently and seriously, had changed everything. If stories like Roberto stay with you, if you believe the human element in any system is worth protecting, you are exactly who Addictive Stories is made for. Subscribe, and we will keep telling the stories that remind us what actually matters.